Welcome back, everybody. Time for our second speaker, Marcel de Vries from Xspirit. Thanks for being here as our second speaker on our first in-person event. First off, a bit of a plug for you. I read you launched your new Pluralsight course about a week ago.
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for those who don't know me, besides doing my job at Xspirit, I spent my time in the weekends doing Pluralsight courses. And the last one that I published is GitHub and Azure, the big picture. And I thought it was a weekend well spent, and apparently people like it, so that's good. And it's about more or less getting a good gist of what does GitHub have to offer. So the whole notion of, okay, you want to do DevOps, you want to do CI/CD, you want to do it in a secure and compliant way. Okay, how do you make that work using GitHub? So I'm going into source control, of course, with Git, then into actions, how do you use projects, pages, wikis, how you actually do code scanning, your supply chain attacks, ensure that they are not there, code vulnerabilities, and also looking at package management. It's a quite nice overview, and in less than 2 hours you get more or less everything to see you want to see that GitHub has to offer at the moment.
Awesome, good stuff. I'll be sure to check that out. So your session is about doing cloud migrations right.
Yeah.
I'd say tell us all about it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and thank you all for attending here in person. Like Stacey already said, it's a real pleasure to be in front of an audience again. See when people fall asleep when you are just doing your talks, smelling people again, sometimes a little bit smelly, but hey, who cares? You can actually touch each other again. So I really appreciate that, so thank you for coming. So my talk tonight is Azure Cloud Transformations done right with a little wink. Like, it's more about, okay, what did we learn over the past 7 years that we did cloud migrations and helped customers into the cloud? And if you're here to just see code and writing code, tonight I will not be writing code. It's more like a story around what we learned and what you can take away if it comes to doing migrations to Azure, and how you can do it in such a way that you are really empowered as a team of developers that can deploy stuff to production, but be safe, secure, and compliant, because that's very important these days when you move this stuff to the cloud. And how do we make that work without you needing to wait days, months, hours for compliance, people saying yes, approvals, and all the other stuff that you have to deal with in the traditional enterprise? So, what I would like to get started with is a little bit of a reflection on where we are at the moment if it comes to technology and if it comes to our industry. Because what I see happening is that there's a lot of stuff happening at the moment, and we all take it for granted, or we don't even notice these things while there have been many changes over the past few years that we sometimes don't really think about. And based on the fact that we as human beings just work in a certain way that we do, we not always ask ourselves the questions, why did we do that again? And should we still apply these kind of practices? And one of the things that you see a lot is that the complexity of our software is increasing. I mean, Stacey just showed you how to do a static web app on Azure, but the amount of code that comes with that, the amount of stuff that you pull in through packages and other stuff, you're really increasing the complexity of applications over and over again. I mean, if we look at the basic Hello World deployed to an AKS cluster these days, it's like a gazillion lines of code for Hello World, and that's then a scalable Hello World, but still it's a lot of stuff that you need to maintain. And that's all what we like, and we love it, but you need to be aware of the fact that things are really becoming increasingly complex. The other thing that's happening all the time is that things are becoming more and more vulnerable, because we take these dependencies on other people's code, we become also vulnerable to other people's mistakes, and all of a sudden we need to take that into account when we do deploy to production. We have way more dependencies, and I can stare at these pictures like for hours and actually see if they match up, and in fact they match up in this particular case. But this is more or less when you do a little bit of node development or a little bit of Angular or React or whatever. Did you ever look at the gazillion packages that are being pulled in? I mean, even just for stupid string compare or a stupid string concatenation there as a package, and you all pull it in, and yeah, if somebody makes a mistake, yeah, it's up to you because you are on the line, because you are not only developing your software, but if you're doing DevOps, is you build it, but you also run it. So it's your beeper going off in the night and actually fixing that stuff. So the big question is, if you look at code today, and if you wrote your solution, and you just leave it hanging there for a couple of weeks, what happens if you want to try to compile it again? All of a sudden, it doesn't work anymore. Because we have, all of a sudden, a new way of what I would call bit rot. The thing is that if you just keep a solution, you just build it and just wait for it for, what we did, for example, Global DevOps Bootcamp, we had a sample application in there. Well, we are rebooting the bootcamp at the moment, deliver that next year, and 158 vulnerabilities all of a sudden in my software. Package that didn't want to pull anymore, stuff just broke. I couldn't even compile it anymore because I needed new SDKs, new compilers, new IDEs. It's just a little bit of a mess, I would say. On the other hand, yeah, we got a lot of stuff and a lot of good stuff and a lot of new technology, but on the other hand, how do we keep this stuff in control? And then take into account what is happening behind the scenes. If you look at the way we look at data centers, is really a paradigm shift. So if you take this into account, how can we cope with all this stuff, and how can we learn from the things that we did in the past? Because if we look at the past, we can a little bit try to see what's in the future, and based on that we can have a look at what's going on. So I thought, why not, just for the fun of it, do a little bit of a look into the past. So what happened when the steam engine got reinvented by a combustion engine? Well, we probably all have seen that all of a sudden things became mobile, right? A mobile engine you had all of a sudden. And what happened is, for example, that this was the street in 1900, and these are the streets in 1913. So in 13 years, all of a sudden, all the horse and carriages were changed into cars driving there. Quite a change, quite some impact, because if you were in horse breeding, you probably are out of a job. But if you were in creating wheels, you might have more work to do, right? So it really depends on where you are. And then what you also saw is that during the Industrial Revolution, we had this whole notion of the industry coming up. And what happened is that we used steam engines to actually get the engines running. And then we got electricity. Now, what was the big differentiator there? Well, most people thought, hey, it's just electricity and I can just run a motor. So what's the freaking difference between steam power and just driving an engine on electricity? Well, the big difference here is that all of a sudden, electricity gave us the opportunity to move away from the rivers, the lakes, and other locations where we needed to get the wood, the coal, the water, etc., etc. So all of a sudden, we became location independent of the stuff that we did, and all of a sudden, we saw migrations going on, the industry moving around, and that was what really was impacting our industry and the way we did our stuff. So while it looked the same, you could still drive an engine, what we have is that all of a sudden it had a global impact on what we did. Now, what happened when the phone got more or less reinvented, or the mobile phone got reinvented, right? And what you see is that there was 2005 when there was the Pope election, and this was 2013 with the Pope election. And you can see that there's a different way of people looking at the world. I'm not sure if you go to festivals, if they're allowed again, but what I see is that people don't take time anymore to actually get drunk and have fun, but they're recording it because then my kids can also watch it or something like that. I have no idea, but that's what's going on. So we tend to forget to actually embrace these things, but it's a really mind-boggling what's going on here. So if you look at this and then say, okay, what is going on? If you look at the paradigm shift going on in the industry with cloud, then you could say, well, is this my current data center? Well, if this is my current data center, and I look at the cloud like this, then it might be quite impactful. Unfortunately, what we see is that often we look at this from a different perspective. We look at this like, yeah, it's like a red phone or a green phone, but we still phone, right? So it's really important that we need to stop thinking within the bounds of what we already learned, but unlock the potential and see what the differentiator is of what cloud can bring. And that is really mind-boggling in some aspects. And you can take that from a perspective from doing, for example, continuous integration, continuous deployment. Because all of a sudden I can just stamp up different environments, use that in parallel to do my testing and validation and just throw it away when I don't need it anymore. But who is actually taking advantage of all those changes that you can pull together when doing cloud? So it's crucially important that you rethink instead of keeping optimizing stuff. Now, if you look at the wise people in our industry, and I would say that Gartner is one of those groups that have these self-fulfilling prophecies. If you attract enough people, they listen to your story and then it comes true. But one of the prophecies they have is that they say, well, by 2025, 80% of the enterprise will migrate entirely away of their current data centers. That's only 4 years or 3.5 years to go. And then 80%. So only 5% of the industry has moved to the cloud. Only 5. It's mind-boggling if you see the amount of work we already have, and then let's all move to the cloud. That's going to be insane. I had a nice conversation with Scott Guthrie when we were allowed to go in person to the MVP Summit and the RD Summit, 1.5 years ago. And I had the opportunity to ask him the question, so what is keeping you up at night? He said, well, I would never have expected that I would have sleepless night over how long does it take for concrete to dry. Because the problem they face is that they cannot create data centers fast enough. Because the amount of take-up on cloud, which is just tremendous. So one thing I want to emphasize, and probably I'm speaking to the choir, I'm not sure, but the thing is, cloud is not just another data center. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Think of the phone and the mobile phone and the iPhone. It's just such a difference. So look at the cloud as your new iPhone from a telephone perspective, for example. Now, what I see happening, I thought to just create this category of what I would say classical mistakes when doing cloud migrations. And I hope I won't offend people. What I like to be, I like equality, so I will insult everybody equally, okay? Classical mistakes that I see happening around the world is that we say, oh, we're going to move to the cloud, so let's create a team, and that team will move everything to the cloud. Because they are knowledgeable, and we just hire these expensive consultants from Expert because they know a lot, and just will move our stuff into the cloud. Well, one of the things that we think of is we say, well, we love customer intimacy, and so we do not always do what the customer asks, we do what the customer really needs. So in this particular perspective, we come and have a chat and say, well, this might not be the best idea. Because what actually is going on is, and I thought this was a nice way of visualizing what's going on, this is more or less what's going on, okay? So I can repeat that for you if you didn't. But these are these projects that are going along, and all of a sudden your cloud team is coming along. And what happened here is that more or less we have your cloud move team over there, and we have a normal project. And then you ask the guy that is running for his life, that's the CTO, or somebody else. But that's more or less what's going on in the organization. And that's where we see a lot of problems, because they derail all these projects go over budget, no time. And the problem is the cloud team, they were here interim. So that means that they fixed our stuff, we're now in the cloud, we made our KPIs, and now up to the team again. Good luck with the cloud. Okay, so that's really something that we would say, please, don't create a cloud team that actually starts moving this stuff around. You need to take a different approach. An approach also that scales much better in your organization than just having one team that does it all. Then we have the notion of asking operations, hey guys, you are the guys from the data center, right? You know how to build a service catalog. You know how to keep our environment safe and stable. Can you help us move to the cloud? And this has also a very particular effect that I see with many corporate organizations nowadays. Let's ask the operations team to move to the cloud. Well, what will happen? Well, their body of reference or their knowledge is how to run a data center. The cloud is just another data center, right? It's just your normal phone, but now blue, yellow, green, some other flavors, but that's more or less it. Instead of a dial, we now have knobs, but it's still just a phone. And that's the way they look at the cloud as well. So what happens is they start building a service catalog. Because, hey, we need these specific SKUs that we had in our service catalog, and now you can get a small virtual machine and a larger virtual machine, and the only way you get something from IT operations is using a ticket. So now we can create tickets to ask for cloud resources. And I think that some of you already know that that is not the way we do this stuff in the cloud, right? What you need to learn is all of a sudden infrastructure as code. And what you do is you push it to your Git repository and you have some CI going on and perhaps some CD going on, continuous delivery, and all of a sudden your infrastructure is changed. This also means you need to come up with a different paradigm if it comes to rethinking and reimagining how you're doing this stuff. And what I often try to do when I am working with management is to say, well, we need to change the way we look at this, because otherwise we're still optimizing. What we see is that, oh, we can use the cloud and now we can shave some time off, and oh, we just can create a VM and it's cheaper, but that's not what you try to do. So if you're in your organization and you want to make the move to the cloud, take into, I would say, in your memory as a reference, if you're going to the cloud and you want to be cloud native, so fully leveraging the cloud, the thing you need to do is you deploy 30 times a day and you are secure and compliant by default. That's your mode operandi. Because if that's the case, is there still time to first draw up a nice picture on how your infrastructure change will happen, and then go through a change advisory board to make that actually happy? Do you want to have a change advisory board 30 times a day? Probably not. So the reason I'm saying you really need to move the needle if it comes to your reference is if you think 30 times a day, all of a sudden the other stuff that you did is not possible anymore. You need to really rethink things that you're doing. Because the effect of asking operations to move to the cloud is asking the turkey when it's Christmas. And you know what a turkey will say. Oh, Christmas, well, we can postpone Christmas, right? I'm not so fond of Christmas because, I will be eaten. Then we have the Cloud Center of Excellence. Who has a Cloud Center of Excellence? There you go, there you go. Who doesn't want to say that they have a Cloud Center of Excellence? Okay, I almost got you, but I didn't. But so the Cloud Center of Excellence, I want to say here that there is this specific way of doing a Cloud Center of Excellence that I don't like. There are some different ways of doing it in a, I think, better way. But the thing is that the Cloud Center of Excellence often becomes this, what I would call, black hole of knowledge. Everything needs to pass through the Cloud Center of Excellence because, hey, they're the Center of Excellence. And we are nobodies, we don't understand stuff, we need to go through the Center of Excellence to actually get our stuff done. And the problem is that you get a monopoly on innovation because they are the ones doing the fun stuff and you're still stuck in the stuff that you need to do. And the other problem that you see happening is that this is the effect of the bottleneck. Because everything needs to go through the Cloud Competence Center. It means that everything needs to be passed through the Cloud Competence Center. And the poor guys over there and girls over there probably won't be able to manage so many projects that need to move to the cloud. So we need to think different about how we approach these things. Because the cloud unlocks a tremendous set of new possibilities if it comes to how we can do IT. And this is where we need to see how can we then more or less make that part of the way we organize ourselves, how we deliver our software. And then of course there are tools and we need to write code, but it's also about us as people. How do we collaborate? How do we make these things efficient and work together? So for example, let's say you're an ISV, so an independent software vendor. You're just delivering this package, and what happened in the past is you sent them the CD or the disks, and they could install it on their servers. That was the way it was done. And then we modernized things, and they could download it from our FTP servers. That's more or less the way we modernized the way ISVs deliver their software. But now what happens is that our customers tell us, okay, it's nice that you can deliver this package of software, and I still need it for my core business, but I want that delivered as software as a service. I don't want to install your crap anymore, because the problem is that that means that I need to have servers and I need to install stuff. I need to go through these guides, and that's really a difficulty. So can you just provide that as a service, software as a service? And that's on the one hand great if the customer asks you to move to software as a service, but do you have any idea what the implications are for an ISV to move to a software as a service model? Because they were used to just hit the build button, get a package out, burn it on a CD or on an FTP server, and then the customer takes care of the problems, right? Because, hey, it's their service, not my server. I don't need to take care of that. And all of a sudden, you're now an ISV. You all install it on your own servers. And if you created an architecture that was, I would say, more or less one customer, one set of servers, then it's now one customer, set of servers, two customers. Oh, that's a lot of servers, and then three. So that explodes very fast. So the implications of moving your software as a service is that all of a sudden you need to do 24/7 and then 366 days. Why not 365? Because I really like to have the leap years as well. Otherwise we still have outages, so I over-provision here, right? So, but that's the idea. So we need to be available all the time. We need to be on call all the time. But what about the TCO? The total cost of ownership of the software was in the past at your customer. It was their service. They needed to buy it. You just delivered the software and some licenses, and if you were lucky, a service fee to maintain the software. Now all of a sudden, hey, they're running on your servers that you need to maintain, and like I said already, if your architecture doesn't scale that well, then all of a sudden it will be a very expensive business. The software architecture needs to be readjusted, because how do you run a 24/7 operation and do software updates? I have some talks, and I cannot go into it tonight, but and some of my courses at Pluralsight as well, where I go into how do you do 24/7 zero downtime deployments, and how do you do that, because that's what everybody avoids. How do you make that work with a schema change in the database? Because that doesn't really resonate very nicely at a conference. You just want to do the cool demo and some text updates, and all of a sudden it's in the cloud. But no, make a schema change. And how do you make that happen? There's a 5 or a 6 step process that you can go through, and then actually you can stay up and running without going down. But you need to re-architect your software, but you also need to reorganize yourself. Because, hey, we cannot close at 5 because, hey, we've sold our license and we're done. No, we need to be there 24/7. We need to run this operation in a very efficient way. And that means that you will get a different culture, a different way of looking at how we deliver this software and how we cooperate with each other. And how do we cooperate with the people that want us to be compliant? And how do we operate with the people that want to keep us safe and secure? Because they are not there to bug us all the time. They're there to keep us safe, right? So we need to figure out a way on how to make this all work. And that's a different way of working together in teams. And this is a very important one for, I would say, technology leaders that lead teams and lead people. That means you need to gap the technology gap that is in there, the knowledge gap that is in there, because a lot of people just... the only education they get is, here you got an Azure subscription, good luck. Right? And you really need to get good education on how do you build cloud native software. It's a different ballgame, a different way of doing this. So, how do you change your organization to become orthogonal to the cloud and the architectures that you deliver? Because that's really crucially important. Probably you've heard of Conway law, where software more or less models itself towards the organization, or the organization models itself to your software architecture. So the architecture of your software needs to be orthogonal to the way you organize yourself. And how do we make this all work? And what does that imply for your job? I mean, it can have a huge impact if you are in operations and were managing the data center, then this can mean that you will become a bus driver or move to the cloud and actually deliver value in IT still. So if it comes to high-performance IT organizations, we've probably all heard and seen the DevOps state, the state of DevOps reports, where we see that we get like 200 times more deployment frequency, 24 times faster recovery from failure, and all these awesome stuff that gets promised, what we then actually need to deliver when we do DevOps. But this is, I think, a really crucial statement. When you build it, you run it. And that's the way the modus operandi needs to be. And that means that you don't only build the software, but you also need to rethink how I'm doing my software infrastructure that it runs on. And how do I create the infrastructure as code that needs to be deployed as part of my application? You cannot say there's infrastructure and there's application, it's one. And it needs to be deployed as such so that every change in the infrastructure is related to your software changes and vice versa. So, you build it, you run it, is the way you should do it and not run away. And the thing that I often hear is, oh Marcel, we just moved to DevOps, but we separate the development from the infrastructure. Like, seriously, right? This is almost right. And unfortunately, I'm having these conversations often not with developers and sometimes with architects, not always with architects, more the architects that are good at, I would say, pastel color pictures, but do not know how to code. That's the reason I love coding architects, people that actually can draw pretty pictures, but also can code them up, right? And what we see is that we then have conversations and say, oh, we're going to move to the Azure Cloud, and our architects will guard this, how this should be done. Well, this is also such an interesting way of looking at this, because if the architects are going to guide this, what will happen? I would say, well, that's a brilliant idea, because what will happen is you will get all kinds of steps that you need to go through. And then they say, well, you need to have this document before we can release. Oh, no, you need to have approval from the Cloud Competence Center before you can actually move to the cloud. Oh, no, you're not getting a subscription because, hey, that's costing money, right? And I don't trust you with my money. And I always go and I really think hard, how can people build organizations and don't trust the people they work with? How does that work? I just cannot imagine having people that work for you and you don't trust them. If you hire people that you trust with your wallet, with your spouse. You should just trust them. And if not, then there's something else which is not in alignment, I would say. What I would say, if you look at this type of looking at this is the old way, I would say, on how we manage the data center and how we managed IT, because we had all these toll gates in there. But the other way around, because it's always nice to nitpick and then say, hey, we have these toll gates and it's a stupid idea. Okay, but what is then the alternative? Well, the alternative is really important. That is that instead of looking as a police force what's going on in the organization, you need to move to a different metaphor. And the different metaphor is you need to become a lifeguard. When I say a lifeguard, am I in Baywatch now? No. The idea is that people that are a lifeguard help people swim. They teach people how to swim. They teach people how to survive. And the whole idea is that if you are there as a lifeguard, you still watch over the water if everything is going okay. And the moment you see somebody drown, you go in and you go and help. You're not going to say, that was stupid, just drown. So the whole idea is that you need to rethink also that model of what is the role of the architect here, what is the role of management in here. You need to create a self-learning organization, because if you just give them a subscription, good luck with the cloud, how can you expect that to be successful in one go? You really need to then foster a learning community, a learning organization. And then the lifeguard model is much, much better to actually achieve this. Now, if you remember, the cloud is not just another data center. So what we need to do is we need to embrace the characteristics of the cloud why you want to move. That means that you need to embrace the whole notion of self-service IT. You need to embrace the fact that there's on-demand services. You need to embrace the notion that you do not have to maintain those servers anymore. Use platform as a service, because then somebody else is managing your stuff. And that makes you much more, I would say, productive, and actually will speed up the delivery in your organization by multifold. On-demand scalability. And I just returned from my assignment at a governmental organization where they asked me, Marcel, can you help us out? We really need to slim down our organization and become fit for purpose. It was like 250 people that worked there. And they told me, yeah, we're a government, so we cannot go to the cloud. Why can you not go to the cloud? Because you're a government, so you need to really help me out here. No, that's not allowed in the government. It's not allowed to do anything in the cloud. Okay, but did you see that these and these and these services are already running in the cloud and the government is doing it themselves? Yeah, no, that's not allowed. So we came up with a brilliant idea. We built our own governmental cloud. We know exactly how to run a data center, so we are building our governmental cloud. And they asked me to help, and I said, well, the only way I can help you is that we are going to, and I'm really unfortunate to say this, and a little bit Dutchy, so a little bit, perhaps too outspoken. But I said, well, you created this baby, your baby is ugly, and we're going to shoot it through the head. Because that is not going to fly. We just will quit with this. There's only one way, public cloud, because there's no way in the world you can keep up with what the industry is doing. There's no way you can make your stuff as secure as they do. And the only thing you will manage is just a rack with VMware or a rack with VMs or whatever, but there's no way you can do these kind of services that are in the cloud. And I'm a little bit proud that we actually succeeded shooting the baby through the head, and that we actually moved this organization within 3 months to the public cloud. 3 months. But I must say that had to do with the fact that I was asked to be part of their board of directors. So that means that I had really a say in the way the organization would change. Otherwise, it's often an uphill battle. So that was, I would say, lucky. Not really lucky, because I said I want to do this, but then I need to be part of the management team. Otherwise, there's no way of making this happen. But that said, we could embrace the cloud, we could embrace all these things, could move the software that they now deliver to their own data center all of a sudden to the cloud. We could do CI/CD, and within half a year, we could more or less manage this whole delivery of software and keeping it secure and the secure development lifecycle and all that other stuff that they first took like 5 years to build their own cloud-y thing. We actually moved it into the cloud. It runs there now. And the first customers are moving to that public cloud infrastructure now. So that's quite amazing what you can achieve, but different mindset. All of a sudden I said, no, we're going to deliver 30 times a day. Yeah, but then I cannot do my cloud advisory stuff anymore. No, that's correct. That's off the table. We're not doing that anymore. So you need to look at a cloud as an enabler for moving towards a high-performance IT organization. And the whole idea is that it's more or less a hidden gem that not everybody sees. But you can create a high-performance IT organization because you're embracing this self-service way of doing IT. You have the Agile way of work, which is more or less everywhere nowadays. If you're doing safe, it's not really Agile, but anyway. You can get there, I would say. And what we see is that you need to start enabling the autonomy of the team. And you need to really empower your people. So if you don't trust them, then you fire them, or you hire people that you trust. But you don't go and say, oh, I got all these fantastic people and I love them, but I don't trust them. That's not a way it should work. And if you don't trust them, then I will ask you, why don't you trust them? Yeah, because they are not capable. Oh, wait a minute. If they're not capable, we need to teach them. So we need to be the Baywatch guy, right? And help out and teach them how to do it. So the whole idea is that if you look at the typical organizational model, and this is me drawing pictures, and I try to do sketchnoting, but I'm not that good at it. But the idea is that you have often these business teams, and they have then a product owner, or we have a proxy product owner, because hey, we couldn't convince the business that they actually need to have a product owner. Then we have these teams that actually do some agile stuff on a backlog, and then you have the team, and then they deliver these packages. I tried to make them pretty packages, but not that successful at that. And then we have the red wall. The red wall is where we then move it to production, right? So we can do everything in development, and then we move to production. Everything is different. So, you get just a simple server, and you go to production. Hey, wait a minute, where's the server gone? Yeah, in production, different things are different. We need to scale. We have different hardware, different operating systems, etc., etc. But the thing is, and that is really killing everything in the way the business is run, is the top level part is incentivized for change. Make as much changes as you can. The bottom part is incentivized to keep everything stable. What is the first thing that somebody that needs to operate on stability tells you? You're not gonna deploy on my watch. There's probably an outage. And that also has to do with trust, of course, a mutual trust on what you're delivering to production. But that is really keeping these things from being constant in tension. So if you look at where you would like to move to, is what we call a high-performance IT organization. And how is that crafted? The idea is that you create for every workload or every value stream, or give it a name, but a deliverable set of stuff that is tangible. I would say I prefer it to be functional, cohesive, and not just some CRM stuff that goes through the business, but one functional piece of stuff that you need to deliver. And you get a team that is stable. So instead of creating projects all the time, which creates temporary organizations all the time, so people cannot learn the moment they actually learned, they're gone. That doesn't really help. You create a self-learning organization by creating one fixed team and moving work to the team. And that means that one team can deliver one or multiple value streams, depending on which phase that value stream is in. And then the whole idea is that they use the self-service cloud platform, which then empowers them to deliver all this stuff. And that gives you the way to autonomous deliver that stuff. Because, hey, you build it, you run it. You want to deploy it? Go ahead. It's your watch. And then the only thing you need to do is do some governance around that, so that, for example, as a lifeguard, I like to have little children strapped with a tire around their belly so that they don't drown. And that's more or less the same within cloud. I prefer to use, for example, Azure policies to just enforce the fact that it doesn't really make sense to spin up a Godzilla image in Australia. Because, hey, we're in Amsterdam and the only stuff we do is just web apps. So why the hell would I need that? So getting these policies in place really can give you guardrails and ensure that nobody all of a sudden goes off the map, or giving you a new concept that nobody knows of is what we call a denial of credit card. Because what happens is that you just burn all the money on the credit card and all of a sudden you're out, because then everything comes to a grinding halt. And how do I know? I just burned a credit card 2 years ago. Because one of my guys in the team said, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do something with cognitive services? Yeah, go ahead. We have Innovation Day, so here's the subscription. Go ahead. And he did a query where he was looking for all the posts on Twitter for Storm Katrina. And then he wanted to process them and then see if they were positive or negative. And he succeeded, and we learned that cognitive service scales awesomely, and the function scales awesomely, but my credit card didn't, right? So we burned about, what was it, 5,000 euros in a day. Luckily, I had a limit on the card. Otherwise, it would have been a different story. By the way, Microsoft is very lenient in that way. I just had a little chat with him, saying, it was hard to find where I could see where this was going on. I said, yeah, you're more a wrestler, right? Here, the half is, you get the half back. So that was quite nice. But what normally happens in the organization is, dude, what did you just do? I'm going to fire you. Or, dude, what you did just do? Nobody gets access anymore because, hey, we're not trusting you. And what I did is, we did a learning retrospective with the team. So what went wrong here? Where did we fall off the cliff? And I can guarantee you that person will not do that again. And that is, I think, much more that we got out of that. And it was way more worth than the 2.5K that I eventually spent on that. Because, hey, it was a cheap piece of education, I would say. If you go and find education somewhere in the globe, then probably more expensive than 2.5K. So the whole idea is that you put in some guardrails, do some governance on that, and then really trust your teams and bring the work to the teams. That is actually the model. And then you have the cloud that is actually going to enable this for you. And the whole idea is that you create these autonomous teams that actually deliver this stuff. You might have the IT platform and tools team, but I am very scared of those folks. Because they become the black hole of knowledge very fast. And all of a sudden everybody says, hey, we cannot move forward because the tools team did not deliver X, Y, Z. So what's very important there is to come up with a different concept as well, and that's what we call enterprise open source. So the idea is that the cloud team, while delivering that platform, can probably not deliver everything for everybody, but I still trust my team, and they can still ask questions, and they might need some additional help, and we fly in a consultant or whatever to get that done. But they also can create the templates that the cloud team is building that can become blessed because they actually took all the measures to make it secure and compliant. So that way you collaborate on the whole repository of blessed templates instead of making that a lockdown version. Nobody can access it. No way we're doing pull requests and that stuff. And no, it's from us, right? No. So IT platform and tools team, okay-ish, but be careful there. There are dragons there, I would say. So now you might ask yourself, Marcel, interesting story, crap story, but how do I transition to this high-performance IT organization model? Because if I look at my organization, then it looks not like this. If I look at my organization, I'm not allowed to take full responsibility of stuff, let alone buy something. I mean, I need to go through procurement or whatever, even if it's just €5 subscription for one, for example, those boards that you can use, for example. So how do we get there? And for that, we need to make this transition happen. And then we need to look at, okay, but we have a CISO, we have a change control, we have software architects, we have developers, we have operations, we have networking, we have enterprise architects, heaven forbid. So how are we going to transform to this new organization? And then if I take a look at that, then yeah, perhaps we can create something out of this. So let's do some animations here and create this high-performance IT organization. And what we can do is we can then say, okay, this is the bunch of folks that we have, and we start to transform them to this new model. And what will happen is that then these different people can take part in these multidisciplinary teams that then become stable and deliver a set of stuff that is valuable. And by the way I look at the IT platform team is that they deliver a value stream to the other product teams, meaning that if the value stream is not used, they're obsolete. Okay? And the whole notion here is that then all these people can get a place in these specific business application teams that are there. And they are multidisciplinary. Sometimes they need to learn some new stuff, etc., etc. And then there's this one thingy that I have some difficulties with, what we call project managers. And it's not that I don't like the people that are project managers, but they have a short-term goal on a temporary organization. And what we're trying to do is create a stable organization, a self-learning organization with long-term goals and not only short-term goals. So at the moment, I do not have a good story for the project manager. Please do not make them product owner. That is not the way it should be done. Because then you will create an agile way of work according to project management. Okay? And then one thing that's missing, you really need to involve your business here. And that is sometimes hard. It depends on how you're doing the transformation. It's hard if you're coming from the IT perspective because the business says, hey, I am demand and you are supply, so how are you going to tell me what to do? But if you're more like in an operating model where you can cooperate with each other, then often these people see, oh, but this really is going to enable me in my delivery, and that makes much more sense. So I say that cloud and high-performance IT organizations are a bird with one stone, two birds with one stone. So the whole idea is that the cloud is the ultimate enabler here, and the high-performance IT organization is the next step for the business to move to. Okay? Please do not expect the same results if you are going to use the cloud with the standard target operating model that you currently have for your IT and your business. That way, you're going to use the cloud as just the phone with a dial. And that way, you can do some stuff, but you will not be as successful as your competitors. Now you might say, okay, Marcel, great. But what the heck does this have to do with Azure? Because you were saying to me, Azure Cloud Transition's done right. Well, let's look back a little bit. So the industry is changing, and we are all more or less I would say the frogs in the pan that gets heated, because nobody notices it, but it is actually changing. Our software is just deteriorating under our hands, and we need to manage that. And the only way we can manage that is that we take ownership of that code base and ensure that we have automation in place in every step of the process. If you don't, you will be suffering in the long run. You need to rethink the way we're doing this stuff. And if you rethink, we need to more or less set a new goal. The new goal is we need to create a secure and compliant environment, and we need to empower DevOps teams. That is actually what we need to try to do. Because if we make this happen, then all of a sudden we can accelerate. Then you go, well, yeah, brilliant. But how are we going to make this happen if I'm using Azure? Well, for that, there are some ways you can set up Azure to make this successful. And that's why I would like to use as a closing part of this conversation, or monologue, you might say. So the idea is that what you do is you create this notion of a hub-spoke model. Probably some of you have seen that, but the hub-spoke model is that you have this hub where we put some of the stuff in that the IT tools team, the IT operations team, the cloud team is allowed to set up. And the whole notion is that we can make changes to this through the repository that's actually doing the infrastructure as code with pull requests. So this is enterprise open source on your cloud platform, and that's what you're doing on your hub environment. Then what you do is you create spokes, and a spoke is for every team. Every team has at least one subscription. So watch here, I'm using multiple subscriptions. In the past, Microsoft had the best practice to use one and use resource groups to more or less guard these things. I can guarantee you, you will fail using that. We failed miserably on that in the early days. The problem that we faced is that a subscription is one unit of resources. That means that if you exceed those resources, you cannot use more, and they will cap them for you. You can, of course, use a ticket to get more resources. That might take a while. And the anecdote here is that we had a system failure. We did a deployment, and we were not so fortunate. We're just human, so we make failures. And of course, we did a learn and retrospective after the fact. But the problem we were facing is we wanted to do a roll forward, because roll back is for chickens, right? So we do a roll forward of our new infrastructure, made a change to the infrastructure, and then Azure denied us any more API calls. We exceeded our limit that day. Wait a minute. I now need to wait like another 6 hours before I can use those API calls? Yes. Is there a way to up that limit? No. You can call IT, but they're not home anymore, so there's no way of getting out of that rabbit hole. So that's the way we learned that we need to segregate those subscriptions, and those subscriptions are also a very nice boundary for every workload. Why? Because only the people that are working on that workload have access to that subscription. And by the way, we always create at least two. One production subscription that people can read, not update, because the updates are always done through infrastructure as code. That's the only way to get changes into production. And the second thing is that you then get another subscription for the team, and that subscription is more that dev test environment, and they can use it as ever they want. And by the way, we apply all the policies that we have on production also to the dev subscription. Because the moment they need to alleviate their policies, that is not a problem, because they have the right to do so. But that's the moment they know the light bulb that this stuff will not go into production without any changes to my infrastructure. So I really need to have either a conversation with the people managing that, or get other stuff in place to make it secure or make it compliant, or whatever reason you had to alleviate that policy. We also use, for example, identity management in such a way that we use privileged identity management for all the stuff we do. In production, we have privileged identity management to escalate your rights so that you can, for example, read the actual logs. In development, you're also read-only, and every morning when you come in, you need to escalate. You can do it yourself by just approving yourself or having one of your teammates approve it, depending on how much control you would want to have there. But they know the drill, so everything we do in production is always exactly the same as what we do in our dev test subscriptions. Really important, because then you're doing the fire drills over and over and over again. You don't get shot in the foot the moment you go to production. So the idea is that these teams have these subscriptions. Then we have the hub subscription where the hub stuff is in, and that's where we make the connectivity to our on-prem data center, for example. That's where we do VNet peering between those different VNets that you might have in there. And they all leverage the platform that's underneath there. And there's only one way to move to production, and production is always red, right? So I created a red production environment. And the only way to get there is that you just do your stuff, then you commit it into a repository. We used to use Azure DevOps, but Microsoft decided that's not hip and cool anymore. We need to move to GitHub. So we're doing GitHub nowadays. And what we're doing is then actions and do the automation there. And that's the way you move gradually to production. And this is the only way to get stuff into production, meaning that your CI/CD must be fast. You will not have a CI/CD pipeline that takes like 6 hours. Because how am I going to remediate when I have an issue? That pipeline needs to be like 10 minutes max. Then it needs to be done. So what we do is we use cloud infrastructure. We scale out the infrastructure, use multiple servers in parallel, do tests in parallel, even use different slots, for example, when we move to production. If we're using AKS, you can say, oh, I'm just deploying my pods to AKS cluster. You can also say, well, let's stamp up a different AKS cluster, use traffic management, and then move the traffic between those two clusters. Because I can just kill the other cluster within seconds and still pay more or less the same. And you have a very simple fallback mechanism as well. And the side benefit, by the way, of doing multiple clusters is that you always have an up-to-date cluster with the latest features of AKS in there. Because if you're just upgrading Kubernetes, you have the latest version of Kubernetes, but not the latest version of AKS, which can be quite different. So your team is now in charge. Your team is now empowered. Your team can do everything. And because we do everything with a source code repository, use pull requests to get there, what is the number one rule to be compliant? We need to have traceability, and we need to have a 4 eyes, a 6 eyes, an 8 eyes principle in there to get something to production. And with this, you can more or less get most of the frameworks in your daily delivery. And that's the way we do secure and compliant delivery as a DevOps team. Now for this, we need to bridge the skill gap, because that's very important. There's really a lot to learn. If Azure is not just your other data center, there's a lot to learn on how to actually grab that and leverage that. So please help the system administrators understand that they need to start becoming engineers and start writing infrastructure as code. That's the only way going forward. We as developers can then go berserk and then say, oh no, I want to do Pulumi, I want to do Bicep, and I want to do other crazy stuff. But you can just do ARM as well. It's always a nice fight to have, but at least learn how to become an engineer. That's really important. And also the sysadmin, the only way they make changes is through a pipeline. Then the developer needs to learn to become a DevOps engineer, because that's quite a different cookie. The thing is that a lot of people think that when developers just start doing DevOps, it's just their daily routine. Well, I can tell you that's not, because all of a sudden they're on call rotation. That means that they just get called out of bed and they're not used to that. Okay? So there's a lot to learn there as well. Also to learn that if you make a mistake, you're going to pay for it, instead of that somebody else needs to pay for it. So move towards this whole notion of DevOps, which is really important. And I cannot emphasize that more, but really start experimenting, start doing this stuff. Start small, do it right away. Do not start like, I'm now going to define our new cloud architecture for the next 10 years. I can tell you in 10 years, Azure will look completely different as it is now. Because they're releasing on a cadence of, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, new stuff, and you will be behind. So there's no reason of creating such an architecture. You really need to leave that to the teams and start experimenting there. Don't fear the failure. ensure that you have some guardrails in there. See if you can get somebody to be there to watch over you and teach you to do these things. And very important, celebrate those mistakes. You might say, celebrate those mistakes? Did I celebrate that I just lost 2.5K on my credit card? Well, I was a little bit disappointed at the moment, I would say. It's always better to be disappointed than angry, right? So I was really disappointed. But what we did is a learning retrospective and learned as a team, and that took that in, and then all of a sudden you empower everybody. So celebrate your mistakes by using these learning retrospectives to learn as a team, and then empower your team on doing it better in the future. The only way you can get better at stuff is by failing. You did not learn to walk just by standing up and walking, right? You probably fell a couple of times, and you learned that that's the way to better keep your balance. So really, new mindset gives you new results. Azure is not your next data center. And I hope that resonates with you all. I hope you enjoyed this monologue, and you might have some questions. So with that, I want to thank you so much, and hope to see you later at drinks.
Great session, Marcel. You really covered a lot of challenges that most companies have to overcome to have a successful cloud transformation.
Yeah.
We have one question in the chat.
Yep.
And that question is that it was about the ISV part in your session.
Mm-hmm.
So how would that work for MSPs, from managed service providers?
How would it work for managed service providers? Good question, because I need to really think hard. So for me, I need to validate what a managed service provider is, because is that somebody just selling cloud as a cloud solution provider, or is that somebody that is actually managing the software for somebody else? And if I would then more or less go to the second part, like if I am managing software for somebody else, then you also need to make that in a different way. And that's the reason we started, for example, our DevOps services business. Why? Because we learned that managed services is all about keeping things stable, as less change as possible, because that keeps stuff stable, right? But what we need is the business is changing in their way of delivering. They want to move to agile, and now I'm landing at this MSP. Oh, but they don't allow me to deliver. So what do you do? And what we did, for example, in a couple of cases, is when we do managed service for the customer, we manage their infrastructure, we watch their infrastructure, we give them warning signals to the team, like, hey, you're over-provisioning your service at the moment, what are you doing? But it's your deployment, you're on the line, right? So you need to find a new balance in who is responsible for what to actually make that work. And for that, you can create a managed service that is fully agile by, for example, ensuring that you have a DevOps team that takes in the new changes and delivers that constantly in a same way as a DevOps team would do, but now for that specific customer. And then, yeah, the challenge is, because the MSP business is often like, oh, I can swap around people all the time and that's the way I make more money, you need to come up with a way to then keep the team stable and move the work to the teams. That is a challenge that I don't have a solution for, but that would be the way to approach that.
Yeah, agree. Okay, one more question from my side, and you actually already answered it quite a bit, but we are here with a lot of developers and coding architects, thankfully.
Hopefully.
And yeah. And do you have any advice for them how they can help to drive that change?
Yeah, so one of the things that I learned when I started my career in C++, I thought that I would conquer the world by writing the best C++ that was there. And that was my developer journey, I would say. And one of the things that I learned is that I need to learn to speak to the business. And speaking to the business as a developer has one very specific thing that you need to start understanding and learning, and that is, do not try to convince people with arguments all the time. Because that's what we do as developers, as our first nature. And that is not the way management teams or directors or founders operate. They operate by providing a perspective on what can be, and not want to hear why this is a good choice. So to take an example there, we had some developer that came to us when I was part of the board, and they said, yeah, Marcel, we really need this test environment because this is a good reason, this is a good reason, this is a good reason, this is a good reason. They were all like good reasons, but there was no business outcome for me. There was not, we're going to deliver like 2 times faster, or we're going to deliver less issues or whatever. Because what happened is that person got more or less no from the board all the time, like, yeah, why would you need it? Stop bugging us because, yeah, there might be good reasons, but that's not the way we do it. It's not the way it's done here, right? That's what often the case. But if you provide a perspective like, okay, but what would be the different business outcome for you guys? Then all of a sudden you're talking to the business. So that's what I would give as the biggest advice for developers. The one-dimensional way we try to convince people with arguments is probably not the most efficient way to convince your managers, bosses, entrepreneurs to actually make the change. And I hope that helps.
But that also means that developers need to know something about the business, right?
Well, I do not think that they really need to know something about the business as in how do we make money, but they need to know their product. They need to know what we're trying to achieve, because you need to be more customer obsessed to actually be a good developer team anyway. So I think that is something that would resonate with most people, that you need to know what your customer is actually doing with your stuff, because otherwise why are we doing this, right? So that's really important, but I do not think you need an MBA as a developer to actually convince somebody.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, thank
God,
thank
right?
God, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Great session. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
And thank you all for being here.
Yeah.
And let's hope that that all the next Azure Thursdays will be in person as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.